So I can tell already that the trouble is going to be on this side of the panel, and they're going to have a pillow fight, it looks like.
No, it's me and him.
Okay, then good. We've got you separated. So I'm going to do one really quick thing because you've met everybody and heard them talk already. But I want you to introduce yourself with one thing that's not in your bio that we've heard that you would tell somebody about yourself if you met them just socially. So something we don't know about you yet.
I collect stovetop espresso makers. I have about 220 espresso makers in my house.
I'm going to his house for coffee.
Okay. I also I speak English, Mandarin, and Cantonese. And all the early immigrants of Chinese, like in your Chinatown, are Cantonese people.
Okay.
And me, I love to read graphic novels.
And I warn people that I'm a cyclist.
And just, small distances from his Instagram feed, like 100 kilometers a day. Thing you might not know about me, I run half marathons. So we've got, the theme of the conference has been framed in islands, and we've got business islands and technology islands, but we've also got 4 different countries and arguably markets here on the stage. So I'm going to ask each of you to talk about, is there a difference if you think about, you talked about East versus West. Is there a difference in local versus global projects and working on them these days? Are those 2 different islands or a little island and a big island?
Definitely. I feel after being in the U.S. for 12 years and going back to Hong Kong and China, the context is definitely very different. First of all, I need to explain. I've learned to speak business, right? Because out of necessity, right? Because everybody around me didn't understand what I do, right? Even when I tried looking for a job, the role did not exist back in 2002, right? And if you look at different countries, the history and context is very different. For example, I met somebody in Norway, and their biggest industry is like salmon, right? And I asked her, what do you do with interaction design in the salmon industry? And it's a very different answer than when you work at Google, for example. And when I go to Inner Mongolia, they are, this is what usually happens. People go to a conference, they get so excited about new phrases or buzzwords. They go back to their country, their town, and they're like the Inner Mongolia University, they're like, we need an interaction design program. And I'm like, why do you need an interaction design program? I'm like, what industries do you have in Inner Mongolia? They said, we have cows, coal, and raw metal. And I'm like, so what do you do with that? So I think different context is different, and we need to digest what we learn and apply it, and not apply it directly. I personally have a huge problem with the word design thinking in Asia, because number one, design historically means making things pretty, and number two, Asian people value doing and not just thinking. So instead, I now use the word customer-centric innovation, and it just speaks what it is, right? So I think you have to adapt it to your local situations.
Okay, cool.
You talk about content, which I agree. In terms of content, the differences between global and local projects, of course, they're different. But if you look at the process, the way that you do a project, I don't see any difference. In our company, 40% of the projects are for global companies, and they're more than 2 countries, right? They're global projects, Indonesia, Africa, Latin America, the US, or Europe. And in terms of the process, there is no difference from that project, global project, to a project for a local company in Brazil that explores, lifestyle changes or innovation, in service design, because the process is the same. So if you learn how to do projects, you can apply this process the same way to local or global projects. That's my experience.
I hate to say it, but I agree.
Okay, they're on the opposite sides. Agreement's okay.
We had spoken earlier about disagreeing with one another just as a matter of principle. and I find myself having to agree straight away. But I'll add to that a little. We find that the design process not only can carry across different contexts, be it local or international, but also across very different types of problems being solved. You were telling me about some of the diversity of projects that your studios are currently undertaking, and your ability to continue to use the same process along each of those projects speaks to the power of the design process to solve many different types of problems. We find the same. I was talking last night about designing railway stations. We find the same when we're designing telecommunication services or whether we're working with our taxation office. We can use a very, very similar process irrespective of the nature of the problem that we're solving. It's very powerful.
Okay. Yes, I agree that the process are the same. Still, I think that when we designed locally, we are inspired and we learned a lot. It's a little bit like when we designers do qualitative research. I think when you design locally and you look deep into one small group of people, then you get more insights and ideas that could be then translated and replicated into global context. So maybe it's a little bit naive, but I kind of translate this locality into when we do this qualitative research, and then I use this big data or the statistics and the analytics to understand if one project needs to scale up and how it's going to scale up. And we know that if we go deep into the insight of a small group of people that has certain working practices or certain lifestyles, then we can get something new that then could be very good for the global context.
You know a great analogy that it just occurred to me, that I've used it a couple of times. A great designer is like a chef, like a cook, right? A cook can cook based on the ingredients and the recipes on a specific country. But you take, a great French cook over to China with different ingredients, and he will also be really good, He will create something new, right? He may follow some recipes, but the way that you are a cook, right, is a lot of the principles apply the same way, right?
I will agree and disagree. I'll be yin-yang about this.
That's what we were looking for.
Okay, wait, I might have to take the pillow away.
Pillow fights. Well, but then there's no time to cook in emerging markets, okay? Because things have to speed up, right? So you have to, adapt the process. For example, when we do training in China and Hong Kong, if you ask executives for 4 days of their time, which the Stanford D School is 4 days, nobody would say yes. They said maximum 2 and mostly half a day. Right? So we need to squeeze the process and maybe do the first phase or 2 modules first and then the second time, more trust, So yeah, the process is the same.
Yeah, but those are the adaptations, the local adaptations that you need. Ingredients, timing, different infrastructure.
Yeah.
You won't have a big oven, right? You have a small oven. You have more demanding clients or clients that just want 1 plate and not 3.
That's why I say I agree and disagree.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Okay.
Are we going to allow...
I was going to say, this sounds like it could get out of hand, so I'm going to move on to the
Has
next
a lot of
question.
questions he wants to cover.
Exactly. Hopefully it's not going to be quite, well, maybe it should be quite. I'm going to turn it back on, that's great insight in terms of working with clients and working in different markets. I'm going to ask you to think about working with your own teams and in your own studios. Andrew talked about yesterday morning about how Cooper brings different skills to the table. You talked about, how do you talk to architects when both of you are saying we're user-centered from very different perspectives? within your own teams and your own studios, how do you break down those silos given different backgrounds, whether that's developers, designers, researchers, or just different cultural contexts of international teams?
So in our studio, we hire for diversity of opinion. So we start there. We don't hire the same types of people all the time. So my background is not in design. I don't know whether that's something else that I should admit about myself, but my background is not in design. I actually studied mathematics.
Get off stage.
Yeah. I know. I also studied archaeology and an MBA and a few other things. But the point is, we also have psychologists and anthropologists and industrial designers and some architects and a social scientist and someone who specializes in change management. So they can't help but have an open mind when it comes to working together. They have no choice. They don't get to keep with their own kind because there aren't any others like them in the studio. We hire for that diversity of opinion. So it makes it very, very much easier for them to then go and work with our clients who come from finance or economics or business or some other thing, or engineering or architecture, and welcome their perspective as well.
Well, our group is very small, so I could say probably the same, that we are a multidisciplinary team. But what I want to say is a little bit more provocative. Why do we need a specialized conference on interaction design when in fact we are working in these multidisciplinary teams? And I would like to see here in this conference a little bit more of scientists that are working with artificial intelligence, more anthropologists, more sociologists. I think we need them here.
For us, we had to recruit creatively. Like when I first went back to Hong Kong in 2002, there was no interaction designers. There was no user researchers. Like the only designers that were trained in the schools are graphic design, industrial design, interior design. So the way I recruited our first user researcher, she was actually my tour guide in Thailand, in a city in China. And the reason is because actually when you think about it, it's really relevant. Number one, she was a tour guide for foreigners. Her English was perfect. She is used to culture. She is used to also explaining to people about culture. She is a good simultaneous translator, right? And also she's super responsible because she has to take care of a group of 60 tourists, which we actually need when we do user research. When we have to coordinate a lot of complex schedules for clients coming over to China. And because at that point when we recruited designers, usually graphic designers are not as human-centric. Industrial designers are, but then sometimes they like 2D stuff, like 3D stuff instead of 2D stuff. So right now I keep telling younger designers that it doesn't matter which field you're from because our field is so new. That everybody's from another background anyway, right? It's actually probably the best time to be in our field, right? Because it has not formalized yet, right?
We recruit for something that is very interesting, which is coming to conferences like this and having a lot of people be interested in our company and wanting to work with us. That's one way. But we filter for passion. The most important thing that we look in people is how passionate they are for doing whatever they are going to be doing at in situ. Because a passionate person is intrinsically motivated to keep learning and to explore new ideas and to read and to work and to make this world a better place, right?
How do you know in an interview that someone is passionate?
It's very weird, but I see it in their eyes. Really.
Sparkle.
I mean, passion is visible, right? So my HR person, right, in each of the countries, are very skilled to read that person's eyes and see how passionate they are. You can also see it, by having them tell you, I've read these books on my own, my formal education is one thing, but, I spent, 2 years, learning about, this on YouTube videos and Twitter, and so that's where you see the passion. Right?
We look for curiosity as well, that openness to learning new things, and that real desire to learn.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you both at the risk of not, because when I was hiring teams in my old office, which was a glass fishbowl, so everybody could see interview processes going on, 201, every decision, when I announced it to the team, they were like, we knew. You could tell by body language what was going on in the room. They could see it. They're like, oh, that's the one that's going to be coming in. We've only got a few minutes left, and I'm going to just ask you all to make a comment on one last thing. We've heard a lot about diversity of clients, diversity of skills, diversity of cultures, machine learning, new technology. So where do you think this practice is going? What do you think the challenges are ahead of us?
So I have a very strong opinion on this, which is understanding systems. I think a key skill for designers as we move ahead over the next 10 years, be it designing economics, as someone asked that question earlier today, be it when Heiko was talking earlier about machine learning and feedback loops, that requires you to understand systems and how different pieces of that system play back and feed back on one another. And you were talking about it earlier. And it's a critical skill. We design too many static things. We think of them as static and unchanging, and they're not. People aren't, and when people interact with services and with organizations, they change, their expectations change, their future experience changes as a result, and that feedback loop needs to be understood and intentionally designed. I don't think we teach enough of it. I don't think we place enough emphasis on it.
I think that with AI and robotics coming, I think designers have a huge role in questioning the ethics of that and making sure it doesn't go out of hand, because like Elon Musk says, is unleashing the devil, right?
Right.
And we, as designers, we ultimately ask, like, why are we doing this, right? We are the people who ask that question, like, why? And we need to make sure that we're doing these things to make people's life better and not have unintended consequences.
Well, I think, yes, I definitely agree. We need to know more about systems, but also about human behavior and about the interaction not only with machines, but with humans. I think most of the work that we do is in interaction with other people, experts, with physicians, with scientists. So we need a lot to know how to collaborate and be flexible in this collaboration in order to make our design grow. So it's a lot about these social skills and not only empathy, but it's also about how we do work together with other professionals.
I think it will follow two paths. One is a path of specialization. So from this group, half of you are going to be working on more specialized types of interfaces. So there is going to be the VISA, right? The voice interaction design South America, right?
Right.
And then the other half is going to be more generalized. You're going to be designing systems and services and organizations and countries, right? So it's going to take those two sides, specialization and generalization, with a bigger impact in the world. I think, it's a great time to be a designer, and we will continue to have further and further impact in the world.
Okay, great. Thanks. Well, this has been really interesting. I think over
Just
the course...
Just a taste.
Just a taste, exactly. But over the course of, the last few days, and we still have a couple of talks left, we've certainly seen the breadth of opportunity the breadth of challenge. I'm so glad you mentioned ethics. That's a personal passion of mine. The thing I would say, I get asked, the most common question I get asked as like the sole staff person for IXDA is, how do you do this? And I do it by not just all the local leaders who are out here, but for people like you who've been on stage, who give your time to come here and make this happen. So I just wanted to say thank you to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.